What's up people, Goofy here, and I do apologize for the lack of uploads. I'll talk more on that eventually, but the main reason is because of the video you're watching right now. It's one I've spent a lot of time on, so I really hope you like it. It's a very special one, at least to me, and it's probably going to get very involved. So I recommend you wait on watching this video until you're at home and away from work or school. With that said, thank you for watching, and on with the show. Let's rewind back to the year 1998, which was a pretty good year for video games. Many games that were released became cult classics, like Medieval or Body Harvest. Many already existing IPs would release incredible entries, arguably the best in their histories, such as Metal Gear Solid and F-Zero X. The main focus during this time, however, was that the 3D boom was in full swing, as games like Banjo-Kazooie and Spyro were released to the public on the newest hardware, which at the time was the Sony PlayStation and the Nintendo 64. And one of the games released would be the year's best, and arguably one of the greatest games of all time, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Now sadly, I wasn't a kid in the 90s because, you know, I wasn't born yet. But that didn't stop the powerful mistress of fate from uniting me with this game and allowing me to play the hell out of it, as it was a game I was fortunate enough to get introduced to very early on in my life thanks to emulation. Every gamer has one or a few games that they hold very near and dear to their heart, and for me, Ocarina of Time is one of those games. And seeing as I'm now not too long away from becoming an adult and have a YouTube channel to rant to random people about my near worthless opinions on the internet, I figured now is a better time than ever to actually sit down and deep dive into one of my favorite games. Now, of course, several of you might be rolling your eyes and are tempted to type away in the comments saying how overrated the game is and how everybody's talked to death about it, and are questioning why I feel the need to add my voice to this chorus. And you're right about all of it. The game is probably at least a little overrated, with some even calling the game perfect, which is simply just not true. And it would be impossible not to find some kind of review or retrospective on the subject. But I think something that people have failed to point out over the years are Ocarina of Time's smaller aspects that the game would suffer greatly without. We'll go over that throughout this video, but for now, let's take this in chronological order and start at the beginning. Now, for the sake of this video, I will be playing the Ship of Harkonnen PC port of Ocarina of Time, but only because it allowed for widescreen. I tried to keep all the other settings the same. Also, not that I think people should be spared the details for if they want to play a game they haven't before that's been out for almost 30 years, but for those who apply, this is your one and only spoiler warning. That said, this is my experience of The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Nothing like a heavy dose of nostalgia. May not seem like much, but this title screen sets the stage for the entire game. We see a grown Link riding on Epona across an open field. Familiar yet intriguing music. A fully realized instrumentation of the recorder's song from the first Zelda game plays in the background. And, most importantly, this screen takes place at night, showcasing the game's new real-time mechanic. I don't know if this was intentional, but this small detail is brilliant. In case you forgot, Ocarina of Time was the first Zelda game to implement real-time, making day fade into night, and then back to day again as time passes. And this game uses it to its full potential. Not only does it develop the world of Hyrule and make it more believable, it also plays a gameplay role, affecting what enemies you face or what items you can collect. And this role expands once you learn the Sun Song, allowing you to control when it's day or nighttime. The real-time feature can be further appreciated when you realize it fits the theme of OOT being all about time. It's great. We press start as the game takes us to the file select screen. The iconic theme of the Fairy's Fountain plays in the background, being very similar to the Crystal Prelude from the Final Fantasy series. We select our file, name our character, which for me is aptly Goofy, and the game begins. A cutscene plays, unveiling exposition. In a vast, deep forest of Hyrule, a tree known as the Great Deku Tree watches over the people of the forest, called the Kokiri. These denizens are typically paired with fairies who act as guardians. However, there was one boy among these people who did not have a fairy. We see visions in this boy's head as he is sleeping. Nightmares of a princess on her horse, running away from an imposing man out of a castle. and the boy is stuck in the middle of it. We then cut back to the Deku tree, who's talking to a fairy named Navi. The Deku tree proclaims that he is not feeling well and fears that corruption has taken over his body. So he sends Navi out to the fairyless boy to try to cure his illness. And Navi makes haste. We are then introduced to the fairyless boy, and the main character of the game, Goofy, who's a really heavy sleeper for having a nightmare like what we saw earlier. Hey, come on, can Hyrule's destiny really depend on such a lazy boy? Chick, cut him some slack, he's a kid for goodness sake. Navi tells us that we need to head to the Deku tree ASAP, so we hop off our bed and head out. Right away, we're given a rarity in video games, and that's the fact that Link is actually a kid protagonist. See, normally in most games, we play as someone who's a teenager, or middle-aged, or dare I say, old. But here, we get to play as what most of us were when we played games like this. A child. Think about it. What other games have young protagonists like this? The only ones I can think of off the top of my head are Earthbound and Pokemon, which, unironically, are both Nintendo games. Now, not everyone who first played OOT first played it when they were a child, but to someone who did play this as a little kid, this is great. You get to play as someone in your age group, making the character more relatable and easier to see yourself in. Whether you're curious or mischievous or just want to have some dumb fun, it doesn't matter because you're a kid. And adults in this game treat you as such, for better or for worse. The items you use also reflect this fact, as you're not using a lot of complicated tools or dangerous weapons. You're using things that could be considered toys, like a slingshot or a boomerang, except you're using them in ways that extend beyond just toys. As a kid, I would do stuff like this. I would gather pots and pans, different utensils and toys, and I would pretend to be Link and fight invisible monsters. Of course, it looked a lot cooler in game than in real life. We walk out of our tiny treehouse to find a green-haired girl running up to it, calling us down to talk to her. We find that this girl is Saria, one of Goofy's closest friends. She's happy that we've finally found a fairy and gives us her blessings to go to the Deku tree. We then get a first taste of gameplay. We can move around, talk to NPCs, and quote, attack by pressing A. I never understood why it was called attacking when you just roll in the direction you're moving. Maybe it was a translation thing, I don't know. Something that may be a bit jarring in Ocarina of Time, especially when compared to past entries, is that you start the game with 0 tools. You aren't even given a sword or shield. Most games at least give you a jump or a way to attack first before you go out exploring. But in this game, you have to get all the equipment yourself, even the essentials. This kind of rubbed me the wrong way as a kid, since I wasn't used to having this little to work with. I would always play with cheats to give me all the equipment at the start, so this wasn't an issue. However, the first time I played this game legitimately, I realized the reason why they started you out with nothing. And it's genius. Have you ever been playing through a game and then you just randomly discover that you have an ability halfway through that you actually had at the start? But with this game, that doesn't happen. At least not with any of the important mechanics anyway. This minimalistic approach makes it so that you have to learn each mechanic individually in order to progress forward. It also makes it so that, when you do get your starting tools and weapons, you feel good for earning them. You're awesome because you set yourself up for success to play the rest of the game. It didn't hold your hand, you did the work, and you earned the reward. Now, Ocarina of Time does still hold your hand in later areas, but I'll get to that in a bit. We try to go to the Deku tree, but this snarky kid Mido won't let us until we have at least a sword and a shield. So we roam around Kokiri village and go into some buildings. Goofy throws some pots and rocks around and rummages through some grasses to get some rupees, the currency of Zelda. We then go up to a shop before we're stopped by someone calling us from the shop's awning, telling us to press Z to talk to her. This is another new mechanic of Ocarina of Time, the Z targeting system. Pressing Z allows Goofy to lock onto items, NPCs, and enemies within range with Navi, and we can perform certain actions while in this state, a variety of hops, flips, and attacks. This was a big deal when it came out, as it drastically changed the way combat would be played out in Zelda games moving forward. We also find a small crawl space that we can crawl through, dodge some giant boulders, and get the Kokiri sword out of a chest. Some Kokiri nearby teach us how to use our sword and shield, as well as how to use items and look at our map. The inventory screen itself is one of the most uniquely presented in any game, I think. Most inventory screens are static and transition, but this game brings up the inventory via panels folding up, kinda like a portable box. It's weird, but really cool. I'm surprised more games don't do stuff like this. The inventory lets you see all of your collected items, your equipment, complete with a neat little pose of Link, your quest status, and your map. Getting to see all of this fill up is about as satisfying as seeing a clean patio in Power Wash Simulator. There's a training area outside where we can practice our newly discovered techniques, which I use to brutally massacre every sign in the area. Hiya! Why won't you die? Yeah! Hey cool, there's a path around a building that takes us to a crow's nest in the area. We meet a young lady who calls us a real man and tells us we can look around with the see up button. Neat. As we explore, it won't be long until we get bugged by Navi, who's hanging out on the see up button, apparently. We all know how annoying and useless Navi often is, but I will give the devs this much. She was a good idea and had potential. Basically, she acts as the game's big sibling that'll tell you what to do if you get stuck or lost. The problem with Navi, though, is in her execution. You can access her when she annoys you with interjections like, "Hey!" and "Listen!" But the only way to talk to her otherwise is by playing Saria's song, of all things. She'd be much more helpful if the info she gave you was more practical. Now, that's not to say she doesn't tell you any practical information. In fact, if you press Z up while Z targeting an enemy, she can tell you some pretty helpful insight on the enemy, even telling you just how to beat them. Although some lines are more useful than others, and oftentimes they're just fluff or hints that are too subtle. If Navi gave more useful info that was more specific to the current situation, and she was accessible in a way that wasn't annoying or obscure, she could have been a very valuable tool to new players. Unfortunately, she just comes off as notoriously annoying instead. Moving on, we finally get past Mido and head to the Deku tree. We cut up some evil plants and get a new item, the Deku stick, which is flammable and does more damage than the Kokiri sword. The drawback being that it breaks. We can also get Deku nuts, which can stun enemies, and Deku seeds, which will be useful later. The Deku tree greets us as we approach, briefs us on his curse, and asks if we're brave enough to cure it. A little weird, but not as weird as walking into his mouth. That can't be pleasant for the guy, right? He's got a gag reflex? I bet we taste bad. Regardless, we enter the Deku tree, the first dungeon of the game. Dungeons in Ocarina are very similar to dungeons of past Zelda games, starting as a series of rooms that house various enemies, puzzles, items, and 3 key objects: a map, a compass, and an item or weapon required to solve the dungeon's puzzles and beat the boss at the end. However, many of these staples expanded thanks to the introduction of the 3rd dimension. The puzzles are cleverly hidden, requiring you to look around your environment and use your head to solve them. Enemies can now be depicted much more accurately if they're in 3 dimensions. For example, you can actually see bats flying around in the air, and see spiders crawl up and down walls. That might sound unimpressive now, but in the early 90s, the best thing you got were just sprites moving really fast. You kinda just had to pretend they were in the air. In Ocarina of Time, though, there's no pretend. You can see how enemies move to their fullest capability. Well, as well as they're programmed to be anyways. My favorite thing about the dungeons, and even just the locations of this game, is how each one has a distinct theme, and a majority of them are based off of the different elements. Not like periodic elements, no. Like magic elements. Specifically fire, water, wind, light, shadow, and earth. I mean, spirit. Ugh. I don't know why, but this concept has always appealed to me. The idea that the power of the world is divided into magical elements. It's just really cool. And I didn't even watch Captain Planet. Similarly, Ocarina of Time bases a lot of its world and story on traditional European literature. If you dissect the story of this game to its most basic elements, you'll find several parallels to many famous European figures in fiction, such as King Arthur, Beowulf, and Macbeth. The inspirations for this game are both evident and all over the place, and it's not afraid to reference and pay homage to past Zelda games either, especially in its secrets. Back to the Deku tree, we end up getting a slingshot, which can hit things from a distance using Deku seeds for ammo. That's what those are for. We reflect some seeds back at these scrubs using our shield, and they lead us through the dungeon to the boss, Goma, a giant cyclops spider. And this boss terrified me as a kid. I've had arachnophobia for as long as I can remember, and I'm willing to blame this boss for contributing to it. It's just too bad that she's really easy. In fact, there are a lot of things in this game that are really easy. And it's a common complaint I hear among critics of the game. The idea that the enemies and obstacles aren't as imposing or challenging as the ones in, say, A Link to the Past, for example. This is a valid criticism. The difficulty is a little too easy. As long as you stay stocked up on fairies later on, there really isn't a threat of dying in Ocarina of Time. The Z targeting system does trivialize most encounters, and enemies don't have enough ways to attack or defend to make up for it. Even the toughest enemies, like Iron Knuckles, are outmatched because of your more powerful equipment and spells. I didn't even game over once during my playthrough. It's not a deal breaker though. Sometimes it's nice not to have to sweat through a game. The easier difficulty detracts from engagement a little bit, but the game's content is interesting enough to keep it from becoming boring. The game is easy, yes, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing, at least not all the time. After killing Goma, we get a heart container and teleport back outside the Deku tree, who gives info on the cause of these nightmares and visions. The Triforce is a token of the three goddesses of Hyrule, Din, Nehru, and Faeror. It's the main providence of the world and a very powerful force. An evil man from the Gerudo Ganondorf is after the Triforce for himself in order to take over the world. The Deku Tree then thanks us for ridding of his curse, but says it's already too late and that it's time to— Wait, what? Oh no! The Deku Tree dies? Unexpectedly, despite doing everything we could do, the Deku Tree meets his demise. This cutscene is important, as it shows that OOT is not afraid to get serious, that things aren't just sunshine and rainbows. This becomes all the worse when the Kokiri find out about his death, and they blame you for it. You get blamed as a murderer because you tried to help. People say Majora's Mask is dark, but Ocarina of Time can be just as disturbing. This scene proves it, and it's very well done. In addition to a new objective to meet the princess of Hyrule Castle, we receive one of 3 important stones, the Kokiri Emerald, and we leave the village for the first time. Although not before getting stopped by our friend Saria. She's sad to see that we're leaving the forest, but knew that we would someday, and says that we'll be friends forever, before giving us an ocarina, a musical instrument with magical powers, a symbol of her friendship. Now's a good time to talk about some of the music of Ocarina of Time, because the music is almost as important as the game itself. No surprise here, but OOT has one of the best soundtracks in video games. Not because it goes hard or is catchy, but because it fits the many places of Hyrule and plays a bigger role than just in the presentation. The biggest strength of the music in general is how each track can invoke a distinct mood. The theme of Kokiri Village, for example, is welcoming and encourages curiosity. The rather cheerfulness of the Lost Woods theme reflects on the carefree and spirited nature of the Kokiri. The rather primitive instrumentation of the Goron city theme supplements the locale's more cultural yet creative vibe, using the literal grunts of a Goron as an instrument. Kakariko Village's theme is comforting, invoking the feeling of coming home after a long day of work. Lon Lon Ranch does much of the same, and it sounds even better when vocals are added. The theme of Zora's Domain is, no pun intended, very chill, and unironically sounds like it's being played underwater. Even a lot of the smaller tracks are really good. The shop theme is really silly. It makes me feel like I'm waiting to get a haircut at the barber shop. The gallery theme is also very good, especially with that one exclamation that sounds like the one in the 1848 song, "Oh Susanna." Very nice. The horse racing theme is very energetic and makes you feel like you're on a wild goose chase. I really take pleasure in listening to the almost enigmatic properties of the music inside the Great Deku Tree. The potion shop theme sounds somewhat ominous, and makes you think that you enter the domain of a powerful witch doctor. By far my favorite track in the game, though, is none other than the Gerudo Valley theme. Look, there's a reason why I put this in Smash Card. This track is amazing. Koji Kondo clearly took inspiration from many Latin and Middle Eastern music, and it shows. This song is intricate, it's upbeat, and it really fits the atmosphere of Gerudo Valley, making you feel almost like a cowboy riding off into the sunset. Ah, geez, I haven't even gotten to the Ocarina songs yet. There's the obvious ones, like the Song of Time, Zelda's Lullaby, the main motif of the game, as well as Saria's theme and Epona's song. I think the most underrated Ocarina song, however, is the Sun song. I already mentioned how it can turn night to day and vice versa, but it also has an important place in the game's lore. It was created by the Composer Brothers, members of Hyrule's royal family that specialized in researching magic and music. The sound of the song itself seems to mimic the sound of birds chirping early in the morning. This is even more noticeable when you hear it at the beginning of the Hyrule Field theme. Beautiful. There's a video by 8-Bit Music Theory that explains how the limitations of the N64 helped Koji Kondo to create some of the game's best tracks. It's a great video, I would highly recommend watching it. I'll leave a link, get it, in the description below. Speaking of Hyrule Field, I don't think there's a song in existence that can convey being adventurous any better than this one. Maybe the Indiana Jones theme. Just maybe. The many parts and movements of the song make it one of the more impressive pieces out of an N64 game. However, some songs in this game are even more overshadowed. The songs you learn as an adult. I don't hear these get talked about nearly enough, but they're very well put together. As someone who's constantly learning about music every day, these little tunes grow on me the more I listen to them. Take the Prelude of Light, for example. Its low to high note progression emits the feeling of warmth and hope. These militaristic snare drums reflect the more powerful message of the Bolero of Fire. The Nocturne of Shadow is full of sour notes, referring to how off-putting the Shadow Temple is, yet it still manages to sound somewhat melodic. And like I said before, all of the Ocarina songs serve a purpose in the gameplay outside of just being music. Some of them more niche than others, but a purpose nonetheless. Zelda's Lullaby can be used to make arbitrary things happen when you see the royal crest. The Song of Time can do the same thing with these engraved stone blocks. Saria's song can be used to talk to Saria to get some helpful information. Epona's song summons your horse, the Song of Storms makes it rain, and most notably, the different songs you learn as an adult act as a way to fast travel to different locations across Hyrule. There's still a lot to go over with the music. The different dungeon themes, the different songs for the battles and bosses, the Scarecrow song. But a lot of that would be better to talk about at a later time, so I'll spare you the rest for now. Having said goodbye to Saria, we head out to Hyrule Field and get a sweeping view of the massive landscape. An owl by the name of Kabora Gabora greets us from a tree. I always thought his design was really cool. He acts as a mentor throughout young Goofy's journey, sometimes even offering to carry him to certain places if he strays too far from the beaten path. He's very strange in that he has not one, but two faces, and he occasionally rotates his head to switch faces when talking to Goofy. It's just too bad that his dialogue is so long and boring that everyone managed to say as quickly as possible to skip him. We make our way to Hyrule Castle, although not before nightfall. We slay some creepy skellies until the drawbridge comes down, letting us into town. Just before then, I walk up this chain and jump off to get a few rupees. A very good grinding strat in the early game. Hyrule Castle town is a lot more populated and busy than the Kokiri Forest. Several pedestrians are talking, dancing to music in the background, or buying things from the local vendors. There are a few dogs, a chicken, and other children running around. Hey there, stranger. Is that an Alice in Wonderland reference? Huh. Oh hey, the Happy Mask Shop. Let's, Oh, that's right. We can't do it yet because we haven't played enough of the story yet. Okay, this is another complaint from critics. The game tends to force you down the main path much more than past games. This is another reasonable complaint, as it's very restrictive and doesn't allow you to explore things in your own way. Although I'd argue that the linearity actually works in OOT's favor. Think of it this way. Remember that this was a time period where games were trying to be more cinematic and less video gamey, as weird as that sounds. Video game franchises like Final Fantasy and Metal Gear Solid were starting to aim more towards being full-on digestible experiences, rather than just an entertaining novelty. And while the linear progression is more limiting and differs from the 2D Zelda games, it makes the whole presentation of the game more similar to a movie. Complement this with a story that would be perfect for theater and puts an emphasis on fate and destiny, and you have a design choice that is both good and bad. It's not the most terrible thing in the world. I don't blame critics for pointing this out. Most people would probably prefer to tackle the different cities and dungeons in any order. But for this game, I think it fits. We buy the Hylian shield for later, take a shot at the shooting gallery game to get an ammo upgrade, and head to the castle. We can't just march in though, or else we'll get tossed out by the guards. So it looks like we gotta sneak in. There's what looks like an entrance through a drainage system, but some bum is blocking the way and taking a snooze. Fortunately, we see a girl we met in town singing a lovely little tune. She's looking for her father, which I guess is who that guy was. And she gives us an egg. Of all things. The egg hatches after a day, because that's how chickens work, and we use it to wake up the girl's father. He said he must have fallen asleep while trying to deliver milk to the castle. He tells us his name is Talon, and he needs to get back to his daughter Malon before she gives him an earful. And there he goes. With that, we can finally sneak in. And you know, come to think of it, I never thought deep stealth mechanics would be good in a Zelda game. Yet, here we are. In fact, this game is an FPS, a stealth game, a fishing game, a racing game, a fighting game, a horror game, and even a goddamn ping pong game? And people call this game an RPG. What the fuck? And we're here. Big surprise, the princess is Zelda. I always like looking into the windows of the courtyard and seeing all the posters of Mario characters. I guess the King of Hyrule has an obsession with the Mushroom Kingdom. We introduce ourselves to Zelda, who looks like she just came out of the shower, having a towel on her head. She asks us if we have the green spiritual stone. A little nosy, but we say yes. I think it's funny that you can actually say no to her questions and make her angry. It doesn't actually do anything, but it's just really funny. She too has been having horrible dreams in similar vein to ours. Feeling a connection between us, she tells us the secret of the Sacred Realm. We learn that the Sacred Realm in the Temple of Time was built to protect the Triforce from falling into the wrong hands. Ironically, this does foreshadow future events. The Sacred Realm is sealed off by the Door of Time in the temple, which can only be opened by 3 spiritual stones and a special song played on the Ocarina of Time, the treasure of the royal family. Zelda suspects that a man with, quote, evil eyes, who we see through a window, is deceiving the king and is after the Triforce in the Sacred Realm. It's not too hard to recognize that that man is the same one from our dream. His name? Ganondorf. She then writes a letter on our behalf and sends us off to find and obtain the 2 other spiritual stones, although not before getting stopped by Zelda's bodyguard, Impa of the Sheikahs. Overhearing our conversation, she teaches us Zelda's Lullaby, our first song, and one that's very evocative of Zelda herself. We are then escorted out of the castle and directed to go to Impa's home, Kakariko Village, and head to Death Mountain, the home of the Gorons, to find the Spiritual Stone of Fire. But first, we enter Lon Lon Ranch. Gotta wonder what Talon is up to now, right? Turns out, he's sleeping. Again. We meet his fellow farmhand, Ingo, who agrees with us saying Talon's a lazy bum. He seems to be the hard worker around here. And look, there's Malon. She introduces us to a little baby horse named Epona, but she doesn't seem to be too fond of us. Luckily, Malon teaches us a little tune she likes, fittingly titled Epona's Song. After raiding his house, we wake up Talon, and he challenges us to a little game of Find the Chicken. For it, we win a bottle of milk. That'll be useful later. Hey, wait a minute, where have I seen that mustache before? Huh. You know, Talon looks an awful lot like Mario's dad from the Mario movie. I mean, he is wearing a red shirt and overalls, and Ingo's wearing a green shirt and... Wait, whoa, is that a Bowser amulet? That's it, I'm convinced that Talon and Ingo are just the Mario brothers from the first Super Mario game. Guess that makes Malon Mario's daughter? Makes sense with the M's, I suppose. But hey, that's just a theory. Again! We arrive at Kakariko Village, where we meet the most dangerous and imposing enemy in all of Zelda. Chickens! Rest in peace, Goofy. Death by chickens. This lady wants us to return all of them to this coop, and in return gives us a bottle. Gee, thanks, lady. There's a really creepy house we can go into that's got a bunch of spiders in it. Turns out those spiders used to be a family of normal people that got cursed. In order to break the curse, we have to collect these tokens we get for killing these golden Skulltula creatures. They said they make us really wealthy, and well, they aren't kidding. This is where you get your wallet upgrades and a very healthy amount of rupees. The item I was always interested in, though, is the Stone of Agni, which shows the locations of secrets nearby. This was initially how OOT integrated the functionality of the Rumble Pack into the game, but fortunately this port does have a visual cue instead. Many people do complain about how tedious it is to collect these Skulltulas, but honestly, unless you're going for 100%, it's not that bad. I ended up getting well over 50 of these tokens by the end of the game, and by then, you'll have all the best rewards of the quest pretty early on, like the Heart Container, the Stone of Agony, and the 2 wallets. On another positive note, even if you do want to collect all 100 of them, you won't have to worry about running low on rupees ever again, as you get 200 every time you enter the house. The golden Skulltulas are everywhere, typically hanging out at night, and they act as pretty cool rewards for searching around and finding secrets. It may be quite the task to find a majority of them, but actually getting them doesn't require a ton of effort once you do find them. And hey, at least they're not Koroks. On a related note, one of the biggest reasons I still go back to this game is because I learn something new about it every time I play. For example, did you know that you can bump into trees to get stuff out of them? Sometimes you'll even get golden Skulltulas. For the longest time, I had no reason to use the Deku sticks in combat, that is, until I found that they do the same damage as the Master Sword. Combine this with the Crouch Stab exploit, and it makes bosses like Goma look like a joke. Oh yeah, the Crouch Stab exploit. It's really easy to do. Using your sword while having your shield up will make Goofy do a Crouch Stab, and this carries the damage of your last attack. So whenever you want to dish out massive amounts of damage quickly, just jump slash with the Deku stick and Crouch Stab, or Crab for short. Sometimes Navi will just fly over to random locations like there's something there when there isn't. But turns out, that's where you can play the Scarecrow song on the Ocarina to get a Scarecrow to pop up. You can even use the Scarecrow as a hookshot point to get to inaccessible areas. I'm sure many of you have come across these Deku Scrub salesmen. Their items are typically never worth the price, but you can also get item upgrades from specific scrubs that are definitely worth the price. Ever wanted to look at a room with a fixed camera from a different view? Just press C up and presto! There's these chic statue things that blast off like Team Rocket when you bomb them. Shooting this wooden target in the Lost Woods with a slingshot earns you another ammo upgrade, and there's so much more. There's still a bunch of stuff I missed in this playthrough, and many things that I don't remember. It's nice to go back to a game that you think you know so well, yet there's still so much to explore and uncover. It's what makes this game so fun to play, even nowadays. As for the village, there's a head carpenter that oddly wears tiger pants with a team of frolicking dweebs that are working to build up the town. But the carpenter can't seem to take control of them. His son also hangs out in his spot at night, but he'll be important later. There's also a graveyard run by this dude named Dompe, who also runs a side gig called the Heart-Pounding Grave Digging Tour. Sounds fun. This is where we can find the ghosts of the Composer brothers and the tomb of the royal family. Playing Zelda's Lullaby here makes the grave explode! Rest in peace, Goofy. Death by exploding tombstone. We enter the tomb, and big surprise, everything's dead. And even bigger surprise, some things are re-deads. Shriveled up zombie creatures that paralyze you with their awful shriek and cling on to suck the life away from you. These things are honestly one of the most terrifying enemies to come out of this game, and thus, become a staple enemy in future entries. Getting past them takes us to a room where we can learn the Sun Song, which fortunately can freeze the re-deads. Afterwards, we try heading to Death Mountain, but there's a guard blocking the way. After he insults our literacy skills, we hand him Zelda's letter. With some more juvenile ridicule, he opens the gate for us. Before we go though, he recommends we get a proper shield. Way ahead of you there, buddy. And he also asks if we can give him a mask for his son, because he's a terrible father who won't bother to find time in his work schedule to get it himself. Regardless, now we can do the Happy Masks side quest. This is one of my favorites. Completing it unlocks a variety of masks for you to wear, like the Goron mask, Zora mask, or Gerudo mask, which you can use to expose the possible racism of the citizens of Hyrule Castle town. No, never mind. The mask you really want, though, is the Mask of Truth, which allows you to talk to those Sheik statues. Normally, they just tell the time or shoot off into outer space, but talking to them with this mask on reveals hidden information on the world of Hyrule. It's a good way to get some supplemental lore on the game. With that done, we can finally trek up the Death Mountain Trail, a vast rocky path overlooking a series of massive drops with a volcano at the top. Goron City isn't far up. These rock people aren't much more than just that, but damn do they have some good pottery skills. Look at that giant vase in the middle of the room. And it can spin around on its own for some reason. We learned from the local folk that the city has been in a rock famine. Yes, they eat rocks. They haven't been able to eat their proper diet of rocks because their main food source, Dodongo's Cavern, is blocked off by a giant rock. They also eat bombs, which may not grow on trees, but they do grow in flowers. Yes, in this world, bombs are flowers. Hey, you can't expect a game with a giant talking tree in it to make much sense. To make matters worse, the leader of the Gorons, Darunia, took the red spiritual stone and locked himself in his room. Word is that Darunia is waiting for a messenger of the royal family. Well, Goofy doesn't mind assuming that role. After admiring this soft and comfy looking carpet, we use Zelda's lullaby to open the door and say hi to the big man. Darunia is super ticked off and won't let us help him. We'll have to find a way for him to blow off some steam. Not knowing what to do, we backtrack a little bit. There's an entrance to a neighboring land to the Kokiri Forest in the city, an entrance to the Lost Woods. The old owl tells us we need to listen to the song of the forest to find our way. Otherwise, we'll just end up back in Kokiri Village. I always thought this was a really clever puzzle. The Lost Woods is a maze, and you have to listen for the song to start getting louder to know which way to go. There's also branching paths that can lead you to different secrets and areas to explore. It's a really cool gimmick. This is also the best shortcut to certain locations depending on where you're going. We make our way through the Lost Forest to the Sacred Forest Meadow, fight a werewolf, navigate another maze, and make it to the end, where we find our friend Saria hanging out on a log. She says she's been waiting for us and feels that this place will be very important for both of us somehow. Foreshadowing. After a quick jam session, we learn Saria's song. This should break Darunia out of his little tissy fit. We return to Goron City and play the song for Darunia, and he starts absolutely shaking. You go, man! Having calmed down, Darunia reiterates the problem with the Gorons, and says he'll give us the Goron's ruby if we can prove we're a real man and kill the monsters in Dodongo's Cavern. Deja vu. He also gives us these bracelets that allow us to pick up rooted grasses and such, including these bomb flowers. We use one to blow up the boulder at the entrance and head on in. Here we get one of the best items in the game, bombs. This whole dungeon is pretty metal. You even walk inside the skull of a gigantic Dodongo. With that though, the boss is defeated and we get the Spiritual Stone of Fire. Our next destination is Zora's Domain. Along the way we can buy these magic beans which, when planted in soft soil, can grow into these weird flying pods that can take us to previously inaccessible places. A little nod to the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, no doubt. The Zora are these pale fish people that hang out in the water. I honestly thought they looked like aliens the first time I saw them. Oh man, this place is so cool. You ever notice the reflection on the water lines on the walls? I have no idea how they did that on the N64, but it's really impressive. A subtle detail, but a nice touch that helps add to the already well-established atmosphere of the area. We talk to King Zora, who's in distress because his daughter, Princess Ruto, went missing, and he's too flat-bottomed to search for her himself. So I guess Goofy's gonna have to do it. After some searching, we come back with a letter in a bottle from Ruto, saying that she ended up inside of the belly of some guy named Lord Jabu Jabu. Very strange. This gives the king enough motivation to actually move his butt 2 feet, which takes about 2 years. Turns out Jabu Jabu is a giant fish. Makes a bit more sense. Since Ruto's inside his belly, that only leaves one thing to do. This might be a little gross. What? Rest in peace, Goofy. Death by Nom Nom. This dungeon is especially creative, going through the various passages of Jabu Jabu's belly. And what do you know? There's Princess Ruto. She's apparently angry at us for coming here to rescue her, and it looks like she's not gonna leave. Excuse me, Your Majesty, but I don't think that's a good... Damn it. We go after her, and luckily she's unharmed. We bug her enough to the point where she'll let us have the honor of carrying her if we help her find what she's looking for. Yeah, excuse me, princess. I used to have difficulties with this dungeon when I was a kid, because if you stray too far from Ruto, she'll disappear, and you'll have to go back to where she fell in the hole. But at least she can pop bubbles and activate switches. The big item here is the boomerang, which is basically the slingshot without ammo. Another very useful item. While navigating, we stumble across what Ruto was looking for, and surprise, it's the third spiritual stone, the Zora's Sapphire. Goofy could have coaxed her to give it to us, but unfortunately she turned into an octopus. Okay, just kidding, she's fine, but she did go missing, and we need to find her again. That doesn't take long after beating the weirdest boss in the game. Seriously, what is this thing supposed to be? Nonetheless, the day is saved. Ruto is all over Goofy, and we finally get the Zora's Sapphire, which just so happens to also be the Zora's engagement ring. Good luck there, buddy. But hey, now we have all 3 stones. We can finally get these to Zelda. Before we do though, there's an underwater passage that leads to Lake Hylia, and here we can talk to a scarecrow named Pierre. This is one of the coolest mechanics in the game, the ability to create and customize your own ocarina song. It's not the most robust feature, but giving players the freedom to get creative and make their own song in the game is fantastic, which again is surprising since nobody seems to talk about it. And as I said before, the fact that this song actually has a function in game 2 makes it all the better. It's great. After that, we head back to Hyrule Castle, and boy is it getting cloudy. Uh-oh, this looks familiar. Goofy's worst nightmare becomes a reality, as we see Zelda and Impa rush out of the castle on horseback, Zelda throwing an odd object at us into the moat. We look behind to see none other than Ganondorf. We finally get to meet him for the first time. We get a taste of his evil power, as he zaps us with a ball of electricity and zips off. The only remnants of the encounter was the object in the moat, the Ocarina of Time. Suddenly, a vision of Zelda appears, talking to us, and she teaches us the Song of Time. Everything else in town remains the same, except for one dark twist. If we go to the back alley, we'll see a guard who appears to be mortally wounded. He warns us that Ganondorf must be stopped, and that the princess wished to give us something important. He says that if we got it, that we should go to the Temple of Time right away. And with this sentence, he draws his final breath, motionless and unresponsive. This foreboding message sets the tone for the rest of the game. We go to the Temple of Time, placing the 3 spiritual stones on their altar. They open the Door of Time, showcasing a hollow chamber. A light shining through a high window, highlighting the floor with a sword and a mount at the center. The legendary Master Sword. Still with me? Good. Because this is one of the most impactful and pivotal moments in Ocarina of Time's story. The one that makes this game so great. The one that helped define me as a person today. The one that, when finally reached, changes everything. Goofy goes to the pedestal and draws the sword. A great blue beam of energy surrounds us, and we get teleported to the sacred realm. But having opened the Door of Time, we allow Ganondorf to enter the sacred realm as well. This recourse is punctuated by Ganondorf mocking us for our mistake. We're awakened by a dissonant voice in the Chamber of Sages, as we are met by an old man, Roru. He is one of the ancient sages of Hyrule, protecting the sacred realm since the Temple of Time was built ages ago. He assures us not to be alarmed, and tells us to look at ourselves. And we see Goofy as a fully grown adult. I can't stress enough how big this was for me as a kid. The idea that game characters could grow and mature so much was mind-blowing. And it's something that I think I can relate to most now because I'm going through the very same thing. A good coming-of-age story like this was very seldom seen in video games up until that point, especially one that is so unique and dramatic. What makes this sequence so well done is how the moments leading up to it and the moments that follow are symbolic of how it feels to grow up in real life. As a kid, most of your time is spent having fun, not having to worry about serious problems and responsibilities. The world is so much brighter and larger. Almost everyone else is someone you can look up to. But as you grow up, the world around you changes. You may not feel that different at first until you take a look at your surroundings. Just like how Hyrule Castle Town is at first teeming with people, talking and enjoying themselves while listening to music, the place feels so alive. But when you're an adult, it's a ghost town with nothing but darkness, destruction, and death, symbolized by the flattened buildings and re-deads infecting the area, waiting to leech off of you. Turning 18 feels very scary in the same way. The world at this time is not welcoming. It's dark, full of corruption, despair, and betrayal. You're left with very little, if anything, to work with starting out. And you have practically no sense of direction, nothing to help you know what to do. Yet you're expected to function in the messed up world you've been thrown into, well enough to survive on your own. This is what I've experienced, and Ocarina heavily conveys the same thing. The sheer severity of how much the world changed, seemingly instantly, provides additional shock value, which makes this part all the more effective. Hopefully, like the rest of the game, the world gets better as we move on, but for now, it's pretty rough. Not to mention the message of growing up is universal. Everyone can understand it, everyone can relate to it, and everyone goes through the same thing. It's not something you have to think about very hard to understand. It's more about how you feel when it happens, something that is very characteristic of a human being. I think it's safe to say that most gamers have that one game character that is their absolute favorite. One that they not only can see themselves in, but almost want to become in a sense. And for me, that character is Link, the hero of time. Now, there are many different characters in gaming that are very relatable, but I wish to be none other than the prophetically chosen green-clad fairy boy swordsman from the forest. A person who is stoic yet compassionate, brave yet sensible, strong yet clever, heroic, yet honest and humble. Now, obviously you can take one look at me and probably tell that I have a lot to work with on those qualities, but the character is still a huge inspiration for me as a person nonetheless. The only question is, which version? Unironically, as you grow older, your perspective on Child Link changes in proportion to Adult Link. As a kid, I loved Child Link a lot more than Adult Link. As simply put, I thought he was more cool as a kid. But nowadays, I find myself drifting more and more away from getting to see the world in Child Link's eyes, and have found myself liking and appreciating Adult Link more because of the struggles and tragedies he faces from that moment onward. Overall, this scene is memorable, powerful, and is the reason why Ocarina's story remains timeless. Something else I want to talk about is the stuff that you don't necessarily see in-game. The things worth noting that have either been a part of OOT at some point, or have impacted how people view the game. The most important of which being the debate of which game is better. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, or Final Fantasy VII. Now before I say anything, let me preface this. I grew up with Final Fantasy VII as well, and was introduced to it even earlier than Ocarina of Time. My family was a PlayStation 1 first and foremost early on, so my first games were ones like Spyro Year of the Dragon, The Legend of Dragoon, and of course, Final Fantasy VII. So it should be noted that nostalgia shouldn't be a factor here. That said, this is a very well-balanced debate. The two games are comparable in many different ways. Final Fantasy VII has a more expansive world, a deeper story with more character development, and more general content. Ocarina has better in-game graphics, more engaging gameplay, and superior level and character design. The deciding factors for this argument are ultimately subjective, depending on your preferences for gameplay, story, and presentation. However, I think Final Fantasy VII's biggest flaw, and the reason why Ocarina is better, is because of how hard it tried to be more appealing and accessible to a wider audience. That's not to say Square shouldn't have done that. JRPGs wouldn't be nearly as popular nowadays without Final Fantasy VII's influence on the gaming industry. But as a result, the game itself suffered. The difficulty is easier, especially with enemies and bosses. And despite having more developed characters in Ocarina, most of them still fall flat and are considered one note, not getting a lot more room to grow than when you first meet them. Characters like Vincent and Red 13 come to mind in that case. Ocarina of Time's characters may not be quite as developed or meaningful, but they are more recognizable and more interesting. Basically, if Final Fantasy VII was just a 3D version of Final Fantasy VI, there would be no discussion here. Ocarina of Time would certainly lose. But as it stands, I gotta give it to Zelda. Another thing to mention is the fan-made Ocarina of Time Unreal Engine remake, which started almost a decade ago and is still being worked on. It features drastically improved visuals and music as well as revamped levels. I've never played this version, nor can I because my computer can't really handle Unreal 5, so I can't say a lot about the game itself. I will say that it looks freaking incredible and I can't wait to see what the rest of the game will look like. As unlikely as this may be to happen, this makes me really want Nintendo to make an Ocarina of Time movie. I would love to see this game make a transition to the big screen. A question some of you might be asking at this point is, did I play the Master Quest version of this game? And the short answer is no. While I have played a few levels in Master Quest before, my experience with it combined with what I've heard about the dungeon design led me to see it as not worth playing for this video. The same thing goes for randomizers. While some would say that they're more fun than the vanilla game, and I would like to get into randomizers someday, I wanted to focus on an authentic OOT experience here. Lastly is one of the game's most polarizing aspects, the bugs. This game has been picked apart by speedrunners and glitch hunters with infamous exploits as broken as the dreaded arbitrary code execution, to the point where you can beat it in the Smash Bros. Brawl Retro Collection before the time limit runs out. That's just insane. There's the crouch stab exploit I mentioned earlier. There's a way to make your sword attack infinitely so you don't even have to use it. There's an endless amount of glitches you can do with a bottle of bugs. You can play other items like an ocarina. There's the ridiculous super slide, and there's so much more. Fortunately, they don't really affect a casual playthrough, as you do have to go out of your way to find most of them. Notice though, I did say most. One glitch I came across involved completing an enemy puzzle room and collecting a gold Skulltula token at the same time. I'm assuming what happened is that two cutscenes tried to play at once, and since one ended before the other, the game's flag to allow Link to move again never triggered, which put me in a softlock. And I had to restart the game. But hey, at least I could save my progress. Moving on, the reason why we're growing up is because we're too young to be the hero of time, so our spirit was sealed away in the Chamber of Sages for 7 years. Roru gives us a new quest, awaken the 6 other sages by completing the various temples of the elements, wind, fire, water, spirit, and shadow, and use the power of the Master Sword to vanquish Ganondorf and save Hyrule. In addition, we also received the Light Medallion, a symbol of Roru's power as a sage. We return to the Temple of Time, and the first thing we notice is that Goofy outgrew most of his arsenal, including his Kokiri sword, Deku shield, slingshot, boomerang, and Deku sticks. The second thing we notice is the random and mysterious man creepily staring at our backside. His name is Sheik, survivor of the Shikas, and he is here to help us on our new journey. As a start, he tells us to head to Kakariko Village for a way to get into the Forest Temple. And so, we begin. After witnessing the horror that is the ruins of Hyrule Castle town, we sidetracked to Lon Lon Ranch, and boy have things changed since then. Malon and Talon are nowhere to be found, but Ingo's still here, now wearing this ridiculous fancy outfit. What's with the collar, dude? Is that to keep you from biting yourself? Looks like he sucked up to Ganondorf so he could steal the ranch from Talon. He'll get what's coming to him. He allows us to ride some of his horses in exchange for rupees. So naturally, I played Epona's song, and because she was now fully grown, I could ride her. I jumped over a few hurdles, which I guess impressed Ingo enough to let me race him. After beating him in said race, twice, he was furious and locked me in the ranch. How absurd! But no worries, there's a fence that's easily jumpable with Epona. And with that, we get to ride her across Hyrule, after the most epic-looking cutscene in the game. Aw yeah! Having come back, Ingo's got a change of attitude, and is back to his old self. Nothing better than humbling a man with more bark than bite. Hey look, Malon's back too. We can race her obstacle course to have her delivered to our house a cow? How did she even get it here? How does she know where Goofy lives? Is she stalking him? Speaking of our home, Kokiri Village is a complete ghost town infested with Deku monsters, and everybody's scattered or gone missing, including Saria. We find out that she's in trouble at the Forest Temple, but we have no way of getting there yet. Sheik did say to head to Kakariko Village, so that's our next stop. It's fortunate that Kakariko is in good condition nowadays. Most of the Hylian citizens came to settle here. There's new shops, and it's relatively peaceful. The graveyard hasn't changed much, surprising considering how dead the rest of the world looks. But Dampé is nowhere to be found, assumingly dead considering his condition 7 years ago. Luckily, this means we can finally go into his shed and read his diary. The final entry details how whoever goes into his grave will get his, quote, stretching and shrinking keepsake. This part stumped me as a kid because I didn't know what I was supposed to do. There was very little indication of where I was supposed to go. Turns out you somehow have to figure out that you can both pull tombstones and know to pull this specific one to get to Dampé. How? I have no idea. I just said screw it and looked up a wiki the first time through. Nonetheless, Dampé's ghost is down here. And if we can beat him in a race, he'll give us his keepsake, the hookshot. With it, we can finally enter the Forest Temple, although not without getting through the notorious Mido, and these bulldog-looking monstrosities. Just before we enter, Sheik suddenly appears before us. The flow of time is always cruel. Its speed seems different for each person, but no one can change it. A thing that doesn't change with time is a memory of younger days. This touching and compelling monologue ends with a recital of the Minuet of Forest. Speaking of Sheik, his theme is one of the best in the game. The oddly passive instrumentation of the harp reflects his calm and mysterious personality, and further fits when you know the twist of his arc. I also want to take a minute to talk about some more of the music, starting with the dungeon themes. Like I said before, these tracks aren't catchy and they aren't bangers, but they have hidden intricacies and add to the ambience of the environment, almost as if the music is its own puzzle of the dungeon. I already talked about the theme of Inside the Deku Tree, but the music inside Lord Jabu's belly is genius. The percussion is literally designed to sound like a heartbeat. The theme of the Forest Temple is one of the best examples, featuring some of the weirdest rhythmic structures I have ever heard. It's eerie and very unsettling. The temple itself is dark, teeming with ghosts and horrific monsters, with level design that literally twists itself on its head. This is something that puzzled me for a while, but I found out that it was intentional, as the forest areas of the game are inspired by the cultural stigma in Japan that forests are the homes of unburied souls. Spooky. The Fire Temple track is simple. It's pretty similar to the Goron City theme, only less organic and sounding more irony. The Ice Cavern may not be considered an official temple, but its track is probably the most well-made in the whole game. The chime-like mallets perfectly personifying the icy structures that make up the dungeon. The Water Temple has one of the best tracks out of the dungeons, sounding like an expansion of the music from the laboratory in Lake Hylia. The theme of the Shadow Temple certainly fits the dungeon's more horror-centered setting, with a shrieking choir and bone-chilling notes on the harpsichord. And just like Gerudo Valley, the Spirit Temple's theme is a great track, now taking even more inspiration from Middle Eastern music and instrumentation. Outside of the dungeons, a lot of the tracks just sound really silly, most of them complementing the casual nature of their respective areas. Another splendid area of the music are the battle themes, most of them using brass and sharp percussion to symbolize power in battle. A lot of jingles and fanfares are very nice as well. There's the iconic item build-up and fanfare, now being the best version up until that point. The same can be said with the puzzle jingle. There's the revitalizing sound that plays when you get a heart container, invoking a sigh of relief when you hear it. The fanfare that plays when you collect a Skulltula is quick and punctual, making you feel good for collecting it. The rather fluent feeling of the Ocarina and Spiritual Stone fanfares are further expressed with a slower tempo and more build-up. While not technically music, OOT took a page from Mario 64 with its Silver Rupee puzzle, with each rupee you collect sounding a jingle that increases in pitch. There is no sound, however, that makes you feel more accomplished than the medallion fanfare. I could dissect the soundtrack in this game forever, but instead I'll leave you with a little challenge. If you played Ocarina of Time recently, take a listen to the official soundtrack on YouTube. I think you'll be surprised with how many cool little details you'll pick up, how much you missed on the soundtrack because it was being overshadowed by in-game sounds. It's quite a shame to know how much some of these tracks get overlooked. Dungeons as an adult are much like as a child, only now you have to worry about keys. Returning from older entries, keys require you to explore most, if not all, of the dungeon before you can complete it. Doing so gives you a boss key that takes you to the room of the dungeon's boss, as its name suggests. The temple bosses are no joke, as you fight ferocious foes like a Phantom of Ganondorf, which scarred me when I was younger, a pair of evil witches, a floating hand with eyeballs, and a literal fire-breathing dragon. A majority of these dungeons are introduced in playthrough in a similar format. You revisit an area you used to go to as a kid. There's drastic change and a conflict to resolve, which is done by completing the area's dungeons. Sheik shows up, says something poetic, and teaches you a song. You'll fight some enemies, solve some puzzles, and get a key item to progress forward and kill the boss. These items include a bow and arrow, a giant hammer, steel-toed shoes, hover slippers, an upgrade to the hookshot, and a shiny new shield that can reflect light and certain projectiles. Goofy will also get 2 new tunics to fashion himself with, the Goron tunic and the Zora tunic. The Goron tunic lets Goofy survive in extremely hot temperatures, and the Zora tunic lets him breathe underwater. Aside from the useful implications of these in-game, it's just cool to get to customize Goofy's appearance a bit, which was a rarity for games at the time. After you kill the boss, you awaken the temple's sage, who is almost always a familiar face. Remember how Saria went missing into the temple? Turns out she becomes the forest sage. Darunia, who also goes missing, becomes the Sage of Fire. The Water Sage turns out to be Princess Ruto, who went from being a spoiled brat to a competent heroine. In an interesting twist, Impa, Zelda's guardian, awakes as the Shadow Sage. The only sage we don't know already by this point is the Spirit Sage, Naboru, who will be introduced to us later. Seeing all of these people awaken as the protectors of the sacred realm is super compelling. because it shows that Goofy wasn't the only one that grew up, that matured and took on responsibility as an adult and as a hero. Getting to see the sages awaken is a fitting reward for each temple, since it provides the best instances of depth and character development in the entire game. After that, you get the medallion. Peace is restored in the area, except for Zora's domain for some reason, and you move on to the next temple. The main difference between each temple is the conflict of each area. Completing the Forest Temple returns the Kokiri to their home and rids the place of evil Deku monsters. In addition, a new Deku tree starts to grow in the place of the old one. In return for his birth, this Deku scrub enlightens Goofy on where he came from. Surprise, surprise, he's not a Kokiri, and is instead Hylian. Kind of obvious considering the Kokiri never age. Goofy was delivered to the Deku tree by his runaway mother who sent him there for protection. It really raises questions about whose Goofy's parents and ancestors were. The home of the Fire Temple, Death Mountain, is growing more active than ever. Goron City is deserted, with only a couple of Gorons remaining. We meet a roly-poly, who we find out to be the son of Darunia. His name, Goofy. Oh, that's cool. He's the one that gives us a Goron tunic and tells us how Ganondorf imprisoned the Gorons and freed the fire dragon Volvagia. Volvagia? Volvo! After completing the Fire Temple, the dragon is killed, the Gorons are rescued, and the city is restored. Zora's domain, on the other hand, is completely frozen over, devoid of life. The only Zoras that remained are the shop owner and the Zora King. After getting some blue fire from an ice cavern and melting the encased king, he gives us the Zora tunic. We then go deep into Lake Hylia, now dried up from the buildup of ice, and we meet Princess Ruto as an adult in the Water Temple. The Water Temple is notorious for being the worst dungeon in the whole game, as it suffers from bad level design, poor pacing, and a lame final boss. I will give the dungeon this much. It has some cool puzzle gimmicks. A lot of them consist of switching between boots to traverse through underwater segments, wise use of the hookshot, and changing the water level using these glyphs on the wall, similar to Wet Dry World from Mario 64. Here's the thing though, if the only problems were switching between the boots every 5 seconds and the fact that it's underwater, it would be fine. But the biggest culprit here are the dungeon keys. Many of them are spaced out in a way that makes it so that you have to raise and lower the water level numerous times, and you end up constantly going in circles because you never have enough of them. The worst example might be this key right here, where in order to reach it, you have to go directly back from where you came after you just went there. You then have to notice this small detail of a hole that opened up in the floor so you can access the key. In what other game do you ever do this? This is one of the few reasons why the game isn't perfect like some people make it out to be. If this game was perfect, this dungeon wouldn't exist. It's one of the few blemishes you'll come across when playing. Regardless, we beat the water blob and awaken Ruto as a sage. Lake Hylia returns to normal, and Zora's domain remains a frozen wasteland. I mean, Ruto did say things will return to normal eventually, but I have a hard time believing that. Oh well, at least Goofy got a fire arrow out of it. The inciting incident leading up to the Shadow Temple might be the most tragic. We returned to Kakariko Village to find it set ablaze. Seeing as Kakariko kind of became the main hub as an adult, having returned here many times before, this was jaw-dropping to see for the first time. Sheik is standing at the village well, telling us to stand back. Suddenly, the well's post gets blown off and Sheik starts flying around uncontrollably before slamming into the ground. We see a shadow emerge from the well, crawling along the landscape until it charges at Goofy, knocking him out for the count. After waking up, Sheik informs us that the evil shadow spirit has been released, by Ganondorf no doubt. We also find out that Impa is alive and is in the Shadow Temple trying to seal away the evil spirit. We need to go in and help her. But the entrance to the inside of the well is blocked off by rubble, and the entrance to the Shadow Temple is closed by an iron gate. So what are we supposed to do? Well, we need to backtrack. So we head back to the Temple of Time, where we meet Sheik once again. Thanks to him, we find out that we can travel back in time 7 years by putting the Master Sword back in its pedestal, returning to the form of a child once again. This is a really cool idea, as it pushes the door wide open for fourth-dimensional storytelling and wacky time-traveling gameplay gimmicks. To be honest though, I kinda wish you couldn't go back in time. It goes against the main message of Ocarina of Time's story, which is how when you grow up, everything changes and you can't go back. At least, that's how it works in real life. So as much as I love the idea of going back in time and reliving your childhood days with the experience of an adult, I'd prefer this not to be a part of the game. It makes the first transformation between a child and an adult a lot less impactful. Going to Kakariko Village as an adult lets us learn the Song of Storms from Captain Weirdbeard over here. He complains to us that 7 years ago, some kid with an ocarina played the Song of Storms and messed up his windmill. What a coincidence. We can make this a reality by going back in time as a kid and playing the Song of Storms in the same place. This drains the well and opens it up so we can explore the inside. This dungeon is pretty freaky, to be honest. Even as someone who's a near grown-ass man, I still get the heebie-jeebies from some of these enemies. Like, what the heck is this thing? Huh. You know, this isn't the only time I've heard a well being used as a place where horrific monsters dwell. When did The Ring come out again? 2002, huh? I have my suspicions. This dungeon gives us the Lens of Truth, which allows us to view invisible objects in areas using magic, similar to the X-ray vision in Super Metroid. We can now go back to the Temple of Time and turn back into an adult to play the Nocturne of Shadow and warp to the Shadow Temple. Impa awakens as a sage and we get the Shadow Medallion. One more to go. The Spirit Temple is the most unique in that it takes place in a location we've never been to before. The Gerudo don't take too kindly to us because we're a guy, so they throw me in prison. I'd like to repeat that. We get thrown into prison just because we're a guy. Rated E for everyone. We can't complain too much though, because they leave Goofy with all of his items and equipment. We sneak out and explore their fortress where we have to rescue these carpenters that got imprisoned for the same reason we did. What's cool is that we have to fight these Gerudo guards before we can free each one. These fights were always really awesome because aside from being legitimately challenging, you can still lose the fight without dying if you lollygag at the wrong time. Rescuing the carpenters impresses one of the Gerudo guards, so she gives us a membership card, allowing us to roam the premises without getting captured. This gives us access to a couple of side quests and minigames, including the hardest dungeon in the game, which gives you the satisfaction of earning the Ice Arrow on completion. It also gives us access to a maze-like part of the desert called the Haunted Wasteland. Trekking through leads us to the Desert Colossus, the home of the Spirit Temple. Unfortunately, it isn't long before we get stopped in our tracks, so we need to go back. Sheik teaches us the final Ocarina song, and whoa, is that Kabora? Cool to see that old owl is still alive after all this time. Anyway, we go back to the temple as a child, and we meet this lady named Naboru, who I mentioned earlier. She defected from the Gerudo after Ganondorf became king, and she wants us to get some silver gauntlets out of the temple for her to foil his plans. And in return, she'll, quote, do something great for us. Getting the gauntlets doesn't take long, and we even get to see Kabora one more time. But great Scott! She gets captured by these two old hags. They go inside the temple, but they're nowhere to be found where we can go. We'll have to go back as an adult. Hope Naboru is still alive by then. This dungeon is one of the best. The treasure here is the Mirror Shield, which not only looks freaking amazing, but it can bounce light off its surface. And the dungeon makes good use of it, with these clever little light puzzles. As expected, the witches were at the end of the temple, but unexpectedly, so was this Iron Knuckle. Defeating it reveals that it was actually Naboru who'd been brainwashed by the witches to fight against us. And she gets captured. Again. After beating the witches, though, she awakens as the Spirit Sage, and we get the final medallion. If only I knew you would become such a handsome man. I should have kept the promise I made back then. Excuse me? Having gotten all the medallions, we go back to the Temple of Time, where Sheik appears once again. He relays us some more exposition about the Sacred Realm and the Triforce. We learn that the Sacred Realm reflects the purity of the heart of whoever enters it. If that heart is evil, it becomes a hell. If that heart is pure, it becomes a paradise. I guess that would explain why the world seems so much more dark and corrupt when you're an adult. Even things out of people's control, like weather phenomena, are acting up because of Ganondorf's evil heart having entered the Sacred Realm. It is said that whoever holds the Triforce will have the power to govern all, so it can't fall into the wrong hands. If the holder's heart is not pure, the Triforce will split into 3 pieces, representing power, courage, and wisdom respectively. Only the piece that the holder most believes in will remain. The other 2 pieces will be held by others chosen by destiny, showing on the back of their hands. One of those holders happens to be Goofy, as we hold the Triforce of Courage. The other piece, held by the 7th Sage. Princess Zelda used the Triforce of Wisdom to disguise herself as Sheik, to hide from Ganondorf and also help us. This plot twist was a big deal when this game first came out, and it resided alongside numerous other events as one of the biggest secrets in gaming. Nowadays, you really don't hear stories like this about video games anymore, likely due to the principle of preserving spoilers. Either that, or stories in video games just aren't told like they used to be. The last time I can remember a gaming secret like this was probably during the mid-2010s, with games like Five Nights at Freddy's and Undertale having deep and extensive plots that had a sort of suspense to shock formula to them. It's a sad reality of present video games and media in general, but a testament to how well this game's story can stand the test of time, no pun intended. Zelda and Goofy's tearful reunion is capped off by Zelda giving us one of the only weapons that can harm Ganondorf, the Light Arrow. Suddenly, the temple starts rumbling, and Zelda gets captured in a crystal barrier. The King of Evil has found us. Taking Zelda, Ganondorf can now obtain 2 of the 3 Triforces. If we want to get her back, we need to defeat him at Hyrule Castle. The endgame has begun. If we take a look at our inventory, we can see just how far we've come across our journey. Most of these items to start out weren't present or were unusable, but now we have a full arsenal of tools and weapons to take on any challenge we face. It's a very gratifying moment. By this point, I always go with the same set of equipment: the Goron tunic, the Bigoron sword, the mirror shield, and the hover boots. This is the look of Goofy in its true form. Before we head to the castle though, we need to make some preparations, starting with the fountain fairies scattered across Hyrule. The fountain fairies dwell in secret areas, and while they may look like pointy-nosed, half-naked witches, they do actually help Goofy with good intentions. They mainly give him access to magic spells. Din's fire burns things, obviously, Faeror's wind can teleport him places, and most usefully, Nehru's love protects him from taking damage for a limited time. They also give him a charging spin attack that can damage multiple enemies, an extended magic meter, and lastly, double his defense, allowing him to take even less damage. As a cherry on top, each fairy also restores your health and magic every time you visit them. Very helpful. Next, while this item isn't necessary, it is most certainly worth getting, and it involves a lengthy trading sequence. So here we go! We start by talking to the chicken lady who gives us a special chicken that we have to incubate for 24 hours. We use this chicken to wake up Talon, who is chilling in this random house after getting chased out of Lon Lon Ranch by Ingo. We return the matured chicken to the lady and she gives us a blue chicken that rarely crows for some reason. We can take it to the carpenter's son, who just so happens to be the chicken lady's brother, and he was sleeping in the Lost Woods. The chicken woke him up and in return we get a mushroom. Unfortunately, the mushroom has a terrible shelf life, so we gotta get going. We take this mushroom to an old lady running a potion shop in the back of Kakariko Village, and she makes a potion with it and gives it to us. We take that back to where the chicken lady's brother was hanging out, but he disappeared, and in his place was this Kokiri girl. We trade her the potion in exchange for a poacher's saw, which we then give to the carpenter outside his tent in Gerudo Valley. In return, he gives us a broken sword. Gee, thanks, dude. We then travel all the way up to Death Mountain, where we find this large fellow who says he can fix it if we can do something for his irritated eyes. We take the prescription he gives us to King Zora, who then gives us an eyeball frog, weird, and tells us to take it to another old lady in Lake Hylia Laboratory, so she can whip us up some eye drops. The eyeball frog has a short lifespan though, so we gotta launch our fanny perpendicular pronto. She makes the eye drops for us, and we go all the way back up to Death Mountain to give it to the big fella. Now that he's not blind, he gets to work, handing us a claim check as proof. Wait a couple days, and abracadabra, we get the Bigoron sword. Named after its creator, this gigantic blade does twice the damage of the Master Sword, with the caveat of mostly losing the ability to shield yourself. This is one of the most powerful weapons in the game, and boy is it fun to use. We find Hyrule Castle to be in a complete state of disrepair, with the gates smashed and rubble littering the landscape. At least we can take the main entrance this time. Having awakened all the sages, they summon a colorful bridge for us to cross. Or dare I say, a rainbow road. The final dungeon consists of a central pillar with an invisible force field surrounding it, powered by magic cores in adjacent rooms. Each room is themed after the elements of the temples we previously visited, similar to the trope of making the player fight previous level bosses before taking on the final one. But this dungeon is executed in a much better way. Rather than being lazy and just reusing previous level layouts and making them harder, This level makes entirely new rooms out of each element, using the theme to its fullest potential. It's a really cool idea. As we explore, we get our final item, the Golden Gauntlets. These turn Goofy into a buff boy. Just look at him toss this giant pillar aside like it was a chair. I gotta start working out. We destroy all the power cores and the force field dissipates, allowing us to start climbing the central tower of the castle. The ever closer approach of Ganondorf is highlighted by several fights against the game's toughest enemies, numerous flights of spiral stairs decorated by tinted windows, and a church organ playing a suspenseful melody, getting louder as we progress. The further we go, the harder our heart pounds in our chest, and the faster our mind races. When we reach the top, we see the despicable sorcerer playing his organ, Princess Zelda hovering over him in her crystallized prison. Suddenly, the Triforce of Courage reacts, glowing on her arm. The Triforce of Wisdom does the same. And then, the music stops. The Triforce parts are resonating. They are combining into one again. Ganondorf has a word before exploding with power, stunning us where we stand. Navi's so stunned by the dark waves that she can't get close. Not that that would help a whole lot anyway. And with a flick of a cape, the fight begins. The boss fight itself isn't all that hard. You just have to go to one of the corners and play some light tennis, similar to his Phantom from the Forest Temple. Hit him with the light arrow and slash with your sword to do some damage. Soon enough, he goes down. As does the entire castle. Zelda, we gotta get the heck out of here. We make it out alive, with time to spare, as Hyrule Castle collapses to its foundation. It's finally over. Ganondorf is defeated, the world is saved, and... Whoa! There are few final boss fights as imposing and intimidating as Ganon. Thunderstorms shake the sky, the climactic music escalates the intense and epic atmosphere as you fight no longer a man, but a monster several times your size. A ring of fire surrounds the battlefield, and to make matters worse, your primary weapon, the Master Sword, is ripped from your hands. It's a terrific fight, full of thrilling action, forcing you to take advantage of the lesser-used weapons in your arsenal. It's difficulty raising the stakes, for if you die, it's back to the beginning of the dungeon. When he hits you, you go flying, and his only weak point is his sporadically moving tail. This is the definition of a final boss. It's challenging, intense, and makes you feel awesome! With enough vigor, the tide of battle shifts in our favor as we stun Ganon and the wall of fire dissolves, allowing us to reunite with the Master Sword. A few more strikes stuns the monster once more. Zelda holds it in place for us to deliver the final blow, and with one more flurry, it's done. Zelda gathers the power of the sages to seal the evil king in the Chamber of Secrets, his last words being the curses of Zelda, the sages, and Goofy. The intensity subsides to show Goofy and Zelda sharing a moment. Zelda apologized for what's happened to him, saying it was her fault for sending him to the Temple of Time and allowing Ganondorf to access the Sacred Realm. To atone for her mistakes, she's going to play the Ocarina of Time and send him back to the past to set things back to the way they were, for real this time. However, she laments because she knows that the future can't be the same, and they can't be together in this time, not as friends or as companions. Goofy gives her the ocarina, and in a bittersweet moment and a slow lullaby, we depart back to the time when we were a child. The credits roll as we see the various citizens of Hyrule celebrating their newly established piece of the world. I especially like the moment when Mido and King Zora have a relation for being two of the more unpopular characters in the game. It's pretty funny. The music here is one of the best tracks in the game, mixing the melodies and instrumentation from all of the previous songs, yet somehow putting it together in a complementary and cohesive way. The sages gather on the summit of Death Mountain, enjoying the beautiful starry night sky. And last but not least, we go to our hero, Goofy, the star of the show, returning to the Temple of Time. Having fulfilled her service, we say goodbye to Navi, who, while mostly useless, will still be missed as she flies off out the window. We get one last look at the Master Sword, and Goofy, having nowhere better to go, sneaks back to the castle courtyard to see young Zelda. The two match eyes, freeze frame, and music out. Absolutely breathtaking. And then the Scarecrow song plays out of nowhere. Ocarina of Time is a game that I play ceremoniously. And what I mean by that is, I almost feel obligated to come back to this game every once in a while with a fresh set of eyes and a new perspective to remind myself why I appreciate this game so much with what it has to offer. Because having played through this game for the first time in a while, what it has to offer is really special. It's not the best game ever, and it's not nearly perfect, but it fully deserves the influence it had and still has to this day on young and old gamers alike. As it stands, it still remains one of the most definitive experiences in gaming. If you've watched the video up until this point, I thank you for taking the time to go on this journey with me about the familiar and the new. If there's anything you should take from this video, it would be this. Think of your favorite game of all time. Go ahead, I'll wait. Now ask yourself, why? Why do I love this video game so much? What about it makes it my favorite? Because if you can find the answer to that question, you'll be able to digest and appreciate games so much more from that moment on. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. Stay goofy out there.